I'm the Book Baron. Welcome in, everybody. If you are new here, my name is Baron, and today we are finally wrapping up everything that I read in December. December was another month where I did a lot of travel, which meant that there was weeks where I was reading little to nothing. But still, I feel like I read quite a bit, so I'm pretty excited to share everything that I read with you. It was a lot of mid-books, but I did find some winners too, so that's really exciting. It's kind of a mixed bag this month. So I have us angled so we can get like a little bit more light. It's really dreary this month, so I'm trying to get as much natural light as possible. So we're in a slightly new location in my living room. Hopefully it looks somewhat okay. The background does not look as nice, but we have good lighting, and I think I'd rather have that than a good background. All right, roll up my sleeves here. The first book that I read in December was Champion by Emmy Chandler. So this is the third book in an interconnected series. It's like dystopian, prison planet. It's got like a little bit of a sci-fi feel to it. So our heroine's name is Sylvie, and she's committed a horrible crime, but for a good reason. But regardless, that doesn't really matter. She committed the crime. She must suffer the consequences. So she's given two options. She can either death by lethal injection or death by combat. It's not quite death by combat. Basically, they fight gladiator style for televised events, and then one winner each season ends up getting their sentence commuted to life in prison on this prison planet instead. And she's thrown in this pen with all of the worst of the worst. These are like the worst criminals you can think of, and they are not afraid of fighting because these are all the other combatants that she's going to come up against in the upcoming season. Now, they've actually never had a woman choose to do this gladiator style competition, so they're already have a lot of buzz around her, but it also means this is the first woman that a lot of these guys have seen in a really long time. So there's a lot of threats against her bodily person. When she's first coming into the prison, a guy named Graham ends up seeing her immediately and realizes she's gonna have a tough time. Right as the cell door is about to lock down for the evening, he pulls her into her cell and saves her from the other prison inmates. So she's at least protected for the night. But it also turns out that they have a little bit of a connection from their past. And with death around every corner, whether they're in the ring or in their housing unit, they're really fighting for every moment that they can spend together because they never know when it's going to be their last. I would say probably about the first half of this book, like a good chunk of it, was really doing a lot of setup, what the competition looks like, what it's like in the housing unit, how Sylvie got herself there, how Graham got himself there, and also getting their relationship set up, because the second half is all the competition. It's the TV interviews, training between fights, it's the fight themselves, it's them learning about what brackets they're in, the politics of the sponsors, all of that kind of stuff. So the two parts, although very related, feel quite different. And I do think that that made the romance feel like a little bit too instant. I just felt like they jumped into bed like a little bit too quickly. I felt like some of the I love yous felt unearned, even though I can kind of see in the situation that they're in why they would be moving so quickly. The nice thing was I didn't feel like that ended up really stunting the relationship's growth because they didn't have a lot of time for hanky-panky. And so it's not like that became all the relationship was about. There was still quite a bit of relationship development that happens after that. I just wish the order of events maybe had been switched up just a little bit. I will warn you, if you are squeamish, there is a lot of on-page killing. So skip this one for sure. And there's also just kind of like a constant threat of assault. We've got one woman in a pen with a lot of nasty dudes. Just heads up that's a big part of the story too. I think depending on the day, I'm somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4. I think it's a good installment, but it's not my favorite from this series. I definitely think books 1 and 2 way outshine this one. All right, next up, I read Bad Guy by Celia Aaron. So this is a standalone captor-captive romance. I think technically I read somewhere that it's supposed to be like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Basically, our heroine's been dating this guy for a while. She's actually a teacher. I can't quite figure out the geography, but it sounds like she's slightly outside New York City, but her boyfriend's like living in the city. He's a bigwig, like very much involved in like city life, being an executive type guy. But they're quite serious about each other, but they haven't like taken the next steps. He's helped her through some like tough times. And so they're definitely like connected and serious, but haven't like fully committed. Sebastian is the CEO of her boyfriend's company. They end up seeing each other at a party and he immediately is transfixed by her and just feels like maybe her boyfriend just doesn't know how good he's got it. And so he really wants to take her captive and he ends up setting up a sequence of events to make sure that that happens. So I did unfortunately end up DNFing this, not because it's necessarily bad, it's not what I was expecting. I thought this was gonna be like really dark and gritty. It really ended up being more of like a billionaire romance. It read more that way that I would say than almost Captor Captive, because it was, the Captor Captive part felt pretty, I don't wanna say it felt soft because that's inherently just kind of like dark. It was a lot tamer than a lot of the other ones that I've read more recently. Now that I know what it is, I'm gonna sit on this one for a little bit. I put it back on my want to read list and I'm gonna come back to this when I'm in the mood for something more billionaire. I really have to be in a specific mood for that. I really do. So no rating, but I'll come back to that one. Next up, oh shoot, I own this book. Ugh, I forgot. So the next book that I read was Raven So Cruel by Xander. So this is the second book in the Court of Ravens duet. It's like a dark fantasy romance. It's kind of like love triangle, MFM. It's like hard to suss out in the first book. I don't want to get more specific than that because that would not spoil it. I'll tell you about the first book so I don't ruin anything for this one, but basically we're in a war-torn kingdom where it's humans versus shifters, and specifically there's raven shifters in this universe, or primarily like bird shifters. So our heroine is Galantia, and she lives a pretty sheltered life on the human side in a human kingdom, and they've been obviously war-torn for a long time. So on the human side, they're trying to make some more connections and allegiances to strengthen their alliance, and Galantia is sort of been like a disappointment to her family just at every turn. So this is kind of her chance to like make something of herself. So she is promised to someone from another human kingdom. So on her way, unfortunately, she does end up getting taken by her father's enemies, these crow shifters, and she finds herself at the mercy of kind of two different men. Sabian, who is more protective and doesn't quite see her as much as the enemy, but Myler is way more volatile, vengeful, angry, and often takes out his frustration on her because he hates her father. I was happy because my issue usually, especially with fantasy romance duets, for whatever reason, authors love to separate the main characters during a large portion of the second book. And the good news is that is an element in this book, but it does not last that long. And I was very happy about that because that is one of my biggest pet peeves. I want my heroes and heroines to spend a lot of time together. I hate when they're separated. All I want is them to just like get back together. That's why I don't tend to read a lot of fantasy duets. Although it sounds like this series or this duet is like really got a heavy plot, it's actually pretty character driven. A lot of this was self-discovery for the heroine. She's really sheltered and doesn't know much about the world, so honestly a lot of that was really needed, and I thought it was good character growth on her part. One thing I didn't like though was that there was some other woman drama that had kind of been lingering from the other book, and it really came to a head in this book, and it was frustrating because I kind of felt like we have so many other things that are going on that we could have focused on. It just kind of felt cheap, to be honest. It made it feel a little bit formulaic. It's a little bit annoying because this world is so cool. There's so many different things that I feel like we could explore more of or really lean into because we've got these crow shifters. I mean, like, that's just not a common like shapeshifter. I thought that the world was really interesting, but we just like got sidetracked by this other woman drama, and it was really frustrating. But the ending, oh my God, so sad. Like so sad. I kind of waffle back and forth. I'm between a 3.5 and a 4. I think I'm leaning more towards the 3.5 for this one, but pretty solid fantasy romance, especially if you like something on the darker side. All right, next up, I read Born for Silk by Nikki Harris. So this is the first in a new interconnected series. I think this is the only book out so far. It's a dark dystopian romance, but it kind of feels somewhere between fantasy and sci-fi. It's kind of hard to pinpoint. But anyways, we are thousands of years in the future, and basically climate change and genetic manipulation and like just years of war have completely destroyed civilization as like we know it. And what rose up in its place is something a little bit more structured and not as much based on like free will, called the cradle. Basically, you as a person within this society get food, shelter, resources, security. And in exchange, you get designated a life purpose. Basically, you're given a job, and something that you do as a part of your job, your ultimate life's purpose, contributes to society significantly and part of the trade. That's supposed to be the thing that you find most fulfilling in life, that almost all of their life is structured around what their purpose or their duty or their job is. And a big part of that means that there's not a lot of lasting relationships that exist outside of what you need for your role. So Aster is our heroine, and her designated purpose in life is to be a silk girl. Basically, her job is to seduce and catch the attention of either someone in the aristocracy or most ideally the king himself. So they end up producing the heirs to the aristocracy, and the babies they produce basically become part of the cycle in the trade. Our girl gets kind of lucky. She ends up catching the attention of Rome, our king, but he is quite monstrous. He's literally from a line that's been genetically engineered to lead, like enhanced abilities to lead, survive in this dystopian world. So he's huge. He's like 7 foot or something wild. He's heartless. He's brutal. He can't show weakness, no motion. No bonds are going to be formed here. My thoughts on this one. This felt like Dune, but sexy. It's like a dusty red planet, sort of like this emphasis on like Roman style architecture, but then it's sort of got like a Handmaid's Tale feel as well, because it's like less horror. It's a little bit more like fantastical, because there's like these huge birds and stuff like that. I don't know. The world is just, it's really cool. I can't wait to see what else Nikki Harris actually does with this world. I will say, just based on the synopsis, you probably gathered this. There's a heavy emphasis on procreation. So if you're not into that, skip this one. You're not gonna like this one. But if you are a size queen, buckle up. Like I said, he's 7 foot, she's like 5 foot something. So we got some huge differences in every department. And the energy that he radiates is literal touch her and you'll die. So that's fun. So if you like that, that's in here too. The thing that I really liked is it actually started in his perspective. And usually I like when there's a bit of a delay between the heroine and getting the hero's perspective, because it builds some tension and mystery. But honestly, he sets up the world so well, because it's him coming into power and like an incident in his life that kind of changes how he thinks about the world. And you see how cutthroat, how brutal things really are, the decisions he's really gonna have to make. And with her, it's like slightly more of a fairy tale feel. She is kind of like a bit odd. So she does get bullied by the gals around her, but she's supposed to be in an environment where that's not happening. It's supposed to be no stress, just focused on your purpose, like no thoughts, empty head, just focus on what we tell you to. And she wants to be like that. She wants to follow the instructions and be like that, but she can't quite get herself to do it. And so she'll kind of have these like little moments where she's like, oh God, dang it, I'm not following my purpose. Okay, I'm gonna follow my purpose. I'm gonna follow my purpose. When these two meet up, you know, they're really focused on performing their duty, not forming bonds, and it makes it really hard for them to have honest conversations. And so you see through actions that they care about a lot about each other, and they'll say through words a lot of times that they don't want to form these bonds. It does make it so that when they do finally have those honest conversations, or even have little admissions, it does feel really hard fought to even get to those like little moments there. I will say this one is quite high on the spice scale. And while that's fun, I did feel like at times it bogged down the story a little bit. I do get that that was kind of their main way to spend any time together, or really the main way that they've been kind of told to connect in the first place. So it makes sense for the story, but it also, I wanted a little bit more conversation, a little bit of other time spent together. See them in a different setting, building trust, building a relationship of some kind that didn't just involve like physical aspects. One thing that I really disliked was that there were a few times that very modern language got used, and it just didn't feel right for the setting. The heroine uses the term bully gauge, like she couldn't tell if someone was like picking on her. She was like, my bully gauge is broken. I was like, that feels weird. She also talked about being overstimulated, and I'm like, these are just such like hyper modern terms that it felt really strange. That was just like one thing I wanted to flag, because that really got under my skin at certain points. But I devoured this. It gave me that like lovely sucked in, fully invested when I was reading. So even though I had like a few issues with it, overall, I really, really enjoyed reading this book. giving it a rating of 4 stars. Why, hello there. I haven't had to do a voiceover in a minute, so this feels kind of weird, to be honest. I decided I'm gonna bump up my rating. This is the best book I think I read this entire month. So I'm gonna bump this up to a 4.5 because you know what? It deserves it, damn it. And I cannot wait for more books in this series. All right, well, hopefully Kevin's crunching is not picking up on the mic. He has not been eating very much lately, and so I have to monitor his food intake. He's having a side effect from a medication, but like, sorry if you can hear him crunching. I'm just happy he's eating right now. All right, next up we have Under the Oak Tree by Suji Kim, and this is a first volume of a bind up of web novels from Manta, and I think this one is like chapters like 1 through 70 something, like a really high number. It's a fantasy romance with an arranged marriage, and I would say this almost leans more like on the cozy side of fantasy, and it's very character driven. So the premise that we have here is that Lady Maximilian is the daughter of a very powerful duke. She's sort of an embarrassment to her father, so he kind of keeps her tucked away. He doesn't really dote on her. He saves that for the other daughter. She is forced then to marry Sir Rafton, who's this low-born knight, and it's a strategic thing for her father to get him out of a little bit of a situation. It's not really advantageous for her, but they end up having one night together. It's gruff, it's awkward, there's almost no talking, and then he just leaves for multiple years. But when he returns, he is this highly esteemed war hero. He's highly sought after to the point that the princess has proposed marriage to him. So their relationship could go away, which would be disastrous for Lady Maximilian. But when he comes back, he's pissed. He's pissed. His wife is still living in her father's home and wasn't taking care of his estate. So he has come to reclaim her, and thus begins her new life trying to navigate this marriage, figure out how to communicate with people with this speech impediment that she's been trying to hide for so long because she's been cloistered away from the rest of the world. She's still trying to find her place. I read this when I was traveling, and I think this was kind of the perfect book to read then because it's pretty low stakes. It's sweet. You can kind of see the miscommunications happening. It was enough to entertain me, enough to pull me in, but not enough to pull me away from traveling. The heroine, I will say, is very, very naive. Not only doesn't know anything, but won't admit that she doesn't know anything because she's really trying to keep up appearances. Everyone thinks that she's this like noble lady, and she hasn't been treated like that. And so she has no idea. She hasn't been trained to be a noble lady. And so that at times got tiresome. I did feel very bad for her, and I could see why she was making those choices, but it did get tiresome because it's like day to day just trying to prove her worth, trying to prove her value, trying to navigate these relationships, trying to figure out this new house. She's never run a house before. She doesn't know what she's doing, so people make requests of her, and she's just like, yes, oh, that one. She's just so unwilling to turn for a second opinion, a third opinion, that she's just kind of like taking one person at their word. He is absolutely terrible about communication. So if you don't like miscommunication, that is a big, 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 big theme in here. So heads up, skip this one if you don't like that. He makes a lot of assumptions, and that causes a lot of issues, but ultimately he is a very sweet man. I wish there was a little bit more time spent on relationship development. I still feel like they're both holding a lot back, even though we've made some progress, in particular physically. This is surprisingly more spicy than you would expect. And then with this being a bind up, the one thing that with the ending is that it is quite abrupt. I'm kind of assuming it's because it's like in the middle of the series, in the middle of the story. It's not really meant to stop specifically there. Rating of 4 stars. I had a good time reading this. I'm definitely going to pick up the next volume when they get that bind up out. All right. Oh, hi, Kevin. Did you eat something? Are you feeling better? You feeling better? All right, well, he might join us. Next up, I have Keep Me by Sarah Cate, which is part of her latest series. So this one is Marriage of Convenience, Enemies to Lovers, and has some mental health rep. You see my hand moving? I am petting the cat. He is just out of frame right now. We basically have this grumpy, broody Scottish guy named Killian, and he's basically done with the world. He's just had a little bit too much heartache, and so he kind of holds up in his ancestral mansion and turns it into a party house. And his family gets really fed up and decides to intervene. Enter Sylvie, a kind of tough upper crust New Yorker, but she's got her own baggage. So the reason these two end up meeting is because she sneaks into Killian's mansion, trying to sightsee with her boyfriend, because her boyfriend has like some ancestor that wrote a novel and it was on a typewriter that's in Killian's house. But this is a private residence. It's not like this is a place where people can take tours. She's already there and she's like, I guess we're just breaking in to see this family heirloom, damn it. Obviously, that doesn't go over very well. If you found some strange lady in your house, I imagine you'd be pretty ticked off too. So that encounter between the two of them in the house really just ends in disaster. Now, fast forward, Killian's family ends up approaching Sylvie once she's back in New York with kind of a wild offer. Marry Killian for a few years, help him fix his reputation, and they will pay her $10 million. But there's also sort of a catch. They're trying to get this house away from Killian altogether. This is kind of good for Sylvie because she has pretty famous like artist parents, but they have recently cut her off. So she does need money. So she's like, money and a place to stay? This sounds fantastic. But as they end up starting to fall for one another, Sylvie starts having some regrets about the deal she struck with his family. This one was tough because it's really just, it's such a disappointing read for me. There's nothing horrifically wrong with it. I just kind of expected more from a Sarah Cate book. The setup in particular, everything about the setup felt so contrived, so forced. It makes absolutely no sense why the family approached her to do this marriage of convenience. It does not make sense why he even agreed to it. It doesn't make sense. This woman is a screw up when we meet her. She is not doing well. So what about her is going to fix his reputation? Nothing about it makes sense. It works only because we are in a story setting and it's all made up and the points don't matter. I also just felt like the heroine was so unsympathetic. She makes a lot of terrible choices. I mean, the choice even just to go into this man's home in the first place is a strange one. She's got no money, but she makes no effort to try and make herself money. She ends up just crying to her parents. Now, there ends up being more going on with the parents. You understand why that dynamic is so bad later on, but that didn't get set up then. It got set up way later when we wanted it to be like a third act thing. And so then she just came across like a spoiled asshole. I just felt like that part could have been set up better. So I was like rooting for the heroine a little bit more and wanted to see her succeed. Although there is quite a bit of family drama in general on both sides, both with the hero and the heroine, it kind of pops up here and there, but it's not like the main focus like you kind of think it would be. And I do wish that some of those like family dynamics had been fleshed out a little bit better earlier on so that when they cropped up towards the end that they felt more like grounded in something. There was a building of tension. I definitely felt that once we got past the setup and they were just like in the house together, I was like, okay, let's just pretend that didn't happen. I did feel this tension between them and like the progression of the relationship after that, like I felt like seemed like it made sense. But the f it moment that they had was so bizarre. I didn't understand the timing of that. That didn't feel like the pinnacle of the tension to me. So that part was a little weird too. The ending is really sweet. It's a kind of almost like a slow slide into the happily ever after, but I think because it was so slow, it almost didn't quite feel that satisfying. My rating is 3 stars. It's fine. If you want to give it a go, definitely grab it, pick it up. Don't let me deter you. She's got better books. She's got better books than this. Right, next up, I read Find Me by Ashley and Rostek. It's a first in a proper series. It's a new adult high school romantic suspense. Why choose it? 1 year ago, roughly, I think the heroine lost her entire family in like one go. They were unalived. She barely survived. She ends up going into witness protection with a new identity, trying to stay hidden because this stalker is still out there. And she's been living with her uncle, who works, I think, for the federal government. And now it's time for him to kind of go back to work. He really needs to help her kind of get back on her feet. So she ends up buying a house somewhere in Arizona. She needs to finish out high school. She needs to start just like living a regular life. Obviously, she's still grieving and she's really struggling. But the good news is she has moved in next door to 4 hunks who are more than excited to help her get back on her feet. But the stalker is still out there. So that really looms large in her life as she attempts to try and rebuild. All right, Kevin is not doing well, so he might curl up with me. You doing okay, buddy? Yeah, he's not feeling good. So I think that this was like an easy read. It's a pretty good palate cleanser. It's got emotion, but it's not like that rip your heart out feel. I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of more, it's like the difference between sympathy and empathy. Like I felt sympathy for the heroine, but I didn't have empathy for her. Like that sounds cold, but like I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it on that like deep, deep level. Hopefully that makes sense. The flashbacks are quite intense. There are some pretty intense, like kind of scary descriptions. So heads up with that, because the present is mostly like sweet and easy. And it's the everyday life of these guys, like helping her out when she can't get a futon in her house. And she's new to school. So they're going to drive her there and like show her around and introduce her to people. So it feels very, very different. The writing, I think, is pretty like simple and straightforward. But oh wow, do we love to describe an outfit? Oh my God, I think if we had cut that out, the book would have been half the size. So many outfit descriptions. Every time she changes, I even know what her underwear looks like. Like that's a lot. One thing that I will warn you that I highly disliked, there was so much girl hate. This girl is in fact not like the other girls. The rest of them, they're bimbos, evil bimbos that want to fuck the boys next door to her. And how dare they? That got annoying. It was like every girl. It was all the girls. So she's only friends with boys. Cool. Also, that combined with the fact that she doesn't curse did make her come across extremely juvenile, which just feels weird because then she's in this house by herself and living on her own. And it's weird. It was weird. The tension of this book is pretty much predicated on the fact that she thinks she's too damaged to like have someone love her, which I thought was a little bit corny and a little unrealistic. Even though there was a pretty wild cliffhanger, I don't think I'm going to continue with this series. There was nothing really pulling me in. It was fine. It was fine. Give it a go if it sounds interesting, but I was kind of like, I tried it and it's okay. All right, next up we have The Darkness We Hide by Brynn Ford. So this is a first in a duet that will be about this couple, which is part of a broader interconnected series. This is like a dark dystopian romance, and it's kind of got a Prison Planet feel ish, but it is on Earth, and there's like a heavy emphasis on revenge. So I got lucky and I did end up getting an arc of this book, which made me so excited. But we have Gemma, who is our heroine, and she is trying to get revenge against some guys that did some horrible things to her. So she has unalived the rest of the men, and she has one last guy that she needs to get. Now, she's got a plan. The last guy that wronged her is actually in what they call the lawless land. So it's basically the Mojave Desert, like roped off, and then they just dump all these criminals in there. So she ends up live streaming herself, dyeing her hair and singing next to a dead body. And this is all with the obvious attempt to get herself arrested and get into this lawless land. She ends up getting banished there herself. There's a hitch in her plans. There's a guy riding around on a motorcycle trying to snatch her. And that's Oz, our hero. He sees her and just becomes really fascinated by her almost instantly. She's not reacting the way the other inmates that were released at the same time are reacting. He ends up snatching her and bringing her into this gated community. He ends up preventing her from leaving, which she doesn't like. He says it's for her own benefit, but she has a lot of questions about how true that is. Whew, all right. Signed for a package, so I feel a little bit out of breath right now, and I kind of lost track of what I was talking about. So I'm just going to start over with my thoughts on this book. So the heroine's really interesting because when we meet up with her, she's very clearly at her breaking point. And she's kind of rapidly oscillating through feelings of like trying to put together this plan and her revenge, and then also like being in pain and having a trauma response, and like the disassociation descriptions are like really spot on. But it starts off so intense, and it's so well set up though, because you see how much pain she's in and you're immediately kind of rooting for her, even though it opens and she's like with a dead body, live streaming herself dyeing her hair, like unhinged, right? But you're like, I kind of support this woman's wrongs. The setup is pretty much like getting her to prison, and then the rest of it almost happens over like a single day. But it's not like slow paced by any means. There's so much that happens. A constant threat against her life, an action sequence because she has to like take care of herself. And she just like keeps surviving against all the odds. Through all of this just feels so raw, and it's hard because there are times where she does get triggered. And the writing's also poetic, so it just makes you like really connect with her and really connect with the emotions that she is experiencing. When she's with the hero, you're watching that play out, him trying to figure out what's going on with her and her cycling through all these different feelings, all these different emotions. I do wish, if I could be so bold, that the hero focused a little bit less on like, oh my gosh, there's just something about her, I'm just drawn, because I just don't find that like magnetic pull really works for me a lot of times. But I do think that there's like something there. Like I can see that there's something there based on their interactions, especially later on in the book. But overall, I'm so excited for the second book in this duet. I cannot wait, because I think that that is really going to impact how I feel about this book. I think that this is just like the setup for the ultimate score that'll be the second book. So I'm settling on a rating of 4 stars, but honestly, this could get bumped up to like a 4.5 depending on how the rest of this plays out. Great. And the next book is Chained Hands by T.L. Smith. This is a first in a duet. It's Captor-Captive Dark Romance. I'm not going to spend a ton of time describing this book. So the heroine's husband and the heroine go to a club. It's some sort of swing or kink club. And then the hero basically walks up to a man and I was like, here you go. Here's your payment. Deuces, leaves. She's now taken captive by this guy. Cool. This is not good. It's so frustrating because it's like, I think if I could just accept what the author was writing on face value, maybe it could be interesting, but I just like, the setup was so poorly done. I was just like, I have so many questions. Hold on, slow down. We barreled through the beginning to get to the captive part, but then like nothing really made sense. I'm like, who is her husband? Why is he willing to sell her off? Is he in the mafia? Does he do criminal activities? Are we taken by surprise by this? Do we think he works in the financial industry? What's going on there? Does she know? Does she not know what he does? Like, how did we get here? I couldn't even make sense of that. I also just straight up didn't even know the heroine. And in fact, because we were like kind of rushing through the beginning, all of the introduction to the heroine gets done while she's in captivity, which makes no sense. It makes no sense to do it there. She's also got the most severe case of dumb bitch-itis. She will definitely see an early grave. Her thought process after being drugged and taken into captivity was like, oh, excuse me, good sir, I should leave now. What are you talking about? You're not trying to sneak away. You're not trying to be quiet. You're not trying to like flatter him to like figure out what he wants. Like, no, excuse me, I should go. What the fuck are you talking about? The last straw was the most bizarre line of thought. She's been taken captive. She realizes she doesn't know the hero's name. And then suddenly, in the midst of realizing that, goes on a monologue about what she does for work and how much she loves to read. In fact, she was more upset that she wasn't going to be able to work because her phone was taken away and not because she couldn't call help. I'm so pissed. I'm so irritated. That makes no sense. I'm so angry. I'm not even joking. I got like 10% into this and I was like, I'm gonna jump off a bridge if I don't stop reading this. Why am I learning about why you love reading and why you love what you do for work? In the middle, that should have been introduced earlier. Like, that makes no sense to be thinking about that right now when you just woke up and figured out you're in fucking captivity. Your work is not fucking important right now. And then also, the hero speaks Italian, but he has an Irish name. I didn't get far enough into the book to even figure out how the fuck that made sense. DNFing, no rating, but if I would have continued reading it, 1 star. 1 star, 0 stars. Honestly, I might rate this one. This is a 1 star. This is so bad. You deserve better. You deserve so much better than this book. Bringing it down now. Okay, next up I have Redemption by Kenya Wright. This is a standalone. It's romantic suspense. It's kind of got like some Christmas themes. We got a snowstorm. Basically, we have Yoshiro, who's our hero. He's got a mafia past and he's kind of living his life in solitude now. His family was all killed by his former associates. And then we have Ebony, and she is fleeing an abusive husband with her children. And she kind of ends up in an accident. She ends up trying to like turn around in Yoshiro's driveway and she's getting distracted. And she's trying to get to a hotel and it just doesn't end up working out. And she ends up in, kind of crashing the car around Yoshiro's property. So he ends up bringing them in from the storm and is like, just stay with me. Don't, I could help you get your car out, but the roads are terrible. Just stay in my house. I've got lots of rooms. But we do have kind of the threat threat of Ebony's husband lurking around, because it turns out he's coming after her, and he's gonna continue to come after her. But Yoshiro he's not intimidated by this guy, so he's kind of like, I don't know, maybe we just see what he's got. That was a very poor explanation, but also this book is like not, I don't know, the setup's not that complicated. Whoever the reviewer was that said it's both sweeter and darker than you would expect is absolutely spot on. It's sweet in that Yoshiro is like plug and play husband daddy. There's no tension in the sense of like, he's not resistant to her being there. He's excited for her to be there. He's like ready to like jump in feet first. He loves the kids, you know, loves her, thinks she's gorgeous, you know, is like, he's like in it from like almost the beginning. It is also dark in that there's like really graphic descriptions of abuse and violence, which are incredibly intense. Depending on what type of scene you're reading, feels way different. If you're looking for something really sweet, watch out, those are those darker elements. But if you're looking for something dark, this is a lot more sweet than probably what you're looking for. So just like keep that in mind if you're picking this one up. It was not my favorite combo. The sweet parts were a little bit too saccharine for me. It didn't offer enough tension. It felt kind of like Hallmark-ish. So it wasn't my favorite for that reason, but it was a really easy read. I would try more from Ken, You're Right, but not my favorite book. This is the 3.5 star for me. And then we have Break for Me by Ember Nicole. So this is a first in a proper series. It's a dark, I guess, kind of romantic suspense feel. We have Trista, who has been on the run for a really long time from people in her past. She relies on herself. She's always under an assumed identity, and she's constantly moving from place to place, which is exhausting. She can't make a lot of connections. She has to be careful what she says. The latest guy that is after her, whose name is Jersey. So she has had multiple different teams of agents basically sent after her to try and retrieve her, and none of them have been successful. But Jersey and his handler are known for being the people that like get the impossible done. They never fail. So they're like, all right, my guy, you're up. No one else has been able to successfully get this girl. So he goes after her and tries to snatch her so that they can road trip on back to Pennsylvania. For this book, I accidentally ended up DNFing this bad boy. I just sort of lost steam when I was reading it. I don't think there's really anything wrong with it per se. The story just wasn't really pulling me in and exciting me. It's very action-packed. It's kind of got like a Mr. and Mrs. Smith feel almost, because it's like the hero and heroine versus each other. He's trying to get her, she's trying to get away from him. Or even like Bond, because he's got like a handler that's like talking to him over like a headset. Most of the book is them like kind of on the run. It kind of mixed with like a road trip kind of feel. But I think the thing that I really just not loving and couldn't really figure out was the hero and heroine's relationship felt really bizarre. They both just have like a lot of intrusive sexual thoughts about one another, which I think was supposed to build tension. That did not work for me. It just felt like it came out of left field. And in general, the heroine especially went from 0 to 100 quickly with everything, with every emotion. It was like whether she wanted to fuck the hero, whether she wanted to fight him. There's a lot of like slapping him in the face, and she's exploding and screaming. There's not like a build. It's just like, it's nothing to everything. And it made it feel more tropey than I think it could have felt had there been more build. I also just feel like I didn't know the heroine that well. We get pretty well introduced to the hero, and we know a lot about a background on his work and how he got into this line of work and his relationship with his handler. I felt like the heroine, I didn't know as much, and we're getting little bits about her past and why Jersey is after her. But I feel like because I didn't really know her, and I could just never really figure out what was causing her to kind of like cycle through these emotions. Like, what was the thing that was triggering her to go from like fighting to just feeling exhausted? Because she didn't feel exhausted before. So what was the thing that changed? But I know a lot of other people don't feel that way. So obviously I'm not gonna rate this book because I did accidentally DNF it. I put it down one day and I just haven't picked it up since. You know, I might try something from this author again, but I'm gonna be honest, I'm not really in a rush. All right, I think this is our last book, and thank God for that, because I've been filming for a long time and I'm about to run out of storage. The last one that I have for you is King of Flesh and Bone by Xander. This is a first in a duet. It's a dark fantasy romance. This is the same author that did the Court of Ravens duet. And this one, I will say, is much darker and leans more into like a horror feel. Our hero is the King of Flesh and Bone, and he's basically responsible for a number of things, but one of the things is rotting people away when they pass. And he has not been doing that. And that's causing chaos for the living. People and things are like coming back to life. They're like popping up from their graves like during the full moon. So it's like, it's kind of a scary time to be around. So the heroine, through a series of events, ends up accidentally getting taken to this kingdom. He thinks that she's been sent as a spy. Like he can't figure her out. Like maybe she's supposed to be some sort of like sacrifice from the kings, but nope, just an accident. And instead of letting her go and sending her back, he decides to keep her. He wants something warm, he wants something soft, and thus begins a very twisted dynamic between the two of them. Xander knows how to create a really unique world and create a unique story that you have not heard before. Compared to the Ravens duet, as I kind of said, this one is much darker, more twisted. There's some really graphic, kind of horrific, truly dark descriptions that are kind of grotesque. So heads up with that. Like we open with a very graphic birthing scene. It's a lot. I think things sexually ramped up a little bit too quickly for my liking. It is kind of centered around coercion and humiliation, which I think is kind of a theme I'm noticing from the previous book as well. They do end up eventually kind of striking a bargain that I found quite interesting because it sort of leads them to like have kind of a mutual respect for one another, but not necessarily love. And it also gives you an opportunity to see like how similar they are. They have a lot of elements in their backstory that actually make them pretty darn compatible. But I did feel like there was a lot of feelings that felt just like a little bit unearned in the way they were kind of expressed on the page. I will read the second book eventually. It was a good, solid read, but it's good, but it's not great. So I'm giving this one a rating of 3.5 stars. All right, those are all the books that I have for you that I read in December. I'm losing light so fast. So I'm gonna wrap things up here. Definitely let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. If you haven't, let me know what you read in December that you were really loving or you were really hating. I would love to hear anything about what your December reading was like. Don't forget to like this video if you did in fact end up liking it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of my face on your feed. And I really, really hope that I see you on my next video. Bye-bye.